Chapter 21, Part 3. Now we're going to backtrack in time a little bit to cover neoclassicism and romanticism and realism a little bit. So there were still, these things are happening in America. Now remember, we're going back and forth to Europe and studying there. Cole is born in England and then comes to America. Cassatt is in America and she goes to France. So there's a little bit of crossover in that way, but the eras or the time frame is a little bit different because these journeys are quite long, back and forth over the ship with a ship from, say New York to England or Boston to England or whatever the port they're leaving from, or France, and then studying for a while and coming back and bringing a style back. So there's some delay in terms of the styles. So in this particular piece, we're looking at George Caleb Bingham, and this is 1845. So this is Romanticism, and this, it kind of starts, it looks a bit like Neoclassicism in a way, but we're starting to get it. We still have that hard edge, if you notice that. And kind of interesting, this sort of cat here coming with them on this river. But you get that hard edge around there. But we're starting to get in this romanticism with this soft clouds and so on. So we do see some of that in here. So it's a French fur trapper and his son gliding down the Missouri River. So the idea is that we're thinking about nature and we're thinking about, and this is supposed to be a bear, but it kind of looks like a cat to me. But anyway, we don't know. All right, so the avant-garde in the 20th century, we're skipping ahead. Is that the only one we're going to look at? Okay, but you get the idea. There's still some Cole. We looked at the oxbow. So there's still different styles happening and back and forth. So this is kind of a throwback. All right, so we're going to get into the 20th century. Oh my goodness. Matisse and Picasso. Are you ready? So avant-garde term means the detachment of soldiers in the beginning. It's the first ones, the first wave or the first contact. They're ahead of everything else. But it becomes an art term and a sort of a term for culture as well. So you're sort of against, you're ahead of your time. That's one thing. So that's part of it. You're proceeding into certain areas before anybody else is there. And then you're sort of resisting the salon and other conservative forces, that might be holding you back. So in 1903, we get into Fauvism, one of our isms. We have many. We have Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Cubism, Fauvism. So we start to get into another group called the Salon d'Automne, like Autonomy, their own salon, and it's a progressive alternative to the salon. Remember, we had our Salon des Refugiés with Manet and some others in 1863. This is 40 years later. And a lot of different things are happening. So they're trying to come up with this more progressive alternative, showing all these different variations. Matisse is the head of the Fauves. And this is only part of his career. Matisse is like Picasso. They're very similar in age and output. They both make a lot of work and various different styles over time. But this one is the Fauvism that we're going to look at is Fauvism, and it's the wild beast. So this is, you're not going to really connect this with the work that I just showed you, but we're going to look at it again. But it's the idea of freeing color, and it's not connected to reality. A little bit of that precursor we saw in Gauguin, right? The idea of that yellow palm tree. So we're doing all these things to just use color whichever way we want, and also to use colors straight out of the tube without mixing them. That's another part of it, but just the high chroma colors, not toning it down. There's no tint and tone. There's no shading, if you notice that. Also, the idea of high intensity or high key colors, saturated, bright yellows and oranges. Matisse is the only successful artist that mostly uses bright, warm colors and is taken seriously. Most serious painting is done in these drab, dark colors, and it's showing deep emotions. He sort of focuses on joy, and this is sort of almost we almost get a Greco-Roman feel here with this nature scene with playing these flutes, and there's goats and so on, and there's love making in the field and what have you, and there's love and there's nature and there's dancing, very pagan looking. But that's not as important as the color and the deciding the sky is pink and that kind of thing. And then we kind of lose where the trees are and the sky is, in here. And that's also part of Fauvism. It just goes wild. So wild beasts, I know, it doesn't seem that shocking or strange to us now, but at the time, it was a big deal. Then we're going to get into expressionism. So freeing up the use of color is kind of what we're getting into. We're expressing what's happening with color emotionally. And that's true of Matisse too. He's expressing the joy and the fun of things with all these bright colors. It's not to do with the actual object, it's to do with the emotion. Expressionism is also another ism that will not look visually as similar, but it has sort of a root in the same idea. So you're taking away you're taking away reality in terms of color, and you're going to use the subjective feelings in the artist's mind. What they're feeling, they're trying to get that emotion onto the canvas. So it's specifically in Germany in the early 20th century, and we have Die Brücke. This is founded in Dresden. And then we have Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider, organized in Russia by Kandinsky. So it's kind of like these two are both within that, but they quickly move into different directions. But the Germans really have the main claim to expressionism with Kirchner and some of these others. It's the bridge. So their art is a bridge to a more enlightened future. Okay? This is like something you could study for months. Our precursor or our predecessor is Edvard Munch, who's Norwegian. He's not German. I do believe this was shown in Germany, though, and we're not far apart geographically. So he influences the Expressionists. Edvard Munch is kind of a one-off in his own space, using color to express emotion. All this wild, and I would have to say line as well. All these swirling lines, just express this emotion. But it's mostly to do with this color, just showing his fear and his anxiety. So later on here in 1908, we have a bit of a jump here. 16 years later, we get into Expressionism in the proper sense. This is more typical. So Ludwig Kirchner here is showing this isolation of a child in a crowd. A lot of dark colors, a lot of black. So not like the Fauvists where they're showing emotion through pure color. Now, pure color means it means a few things, but it primarily means no black and white added. The Expressionists, the German Expressionists, are using black and white tints and tones, but there's not as much of a reality in the sense of space or the figures or anything else. We're starting to get abstract here in 1908, and we're starting to express some of the emotion of what's happening on the street. And remember, our Industrial Revolution is affecting our mood here. Kandinsky is German, and he becomes really important in color theory and many other things in the art world moving on. But in this particular piece, he's in an expressionist group, the Blaue Reiter. Before we're looking at Die Brücke. Now it also has another German name. So I'm going to read from the book, organized in 1911 by the Russian painter Vasily Kandinsky. This is page 486. Kandinsky had been teaching law in Moscow when an exhibit of impressionist painting so moved him that he abandoned his career and moved to Germany to study art. Kandinsky's early paintings were intensely colored Fauve-like works on Russian mystical themes. He never abandoned his idea that spirituality and art were linked, but he became increasingly convinced that the artist's spiritual and communicative power lay in its own language of line, form, and color, and one and um, and he was one of the first painters to take the decisive step of eliminating representation altogether in such works as Black Lines number 189, which we're looking at here. So he's also a key member of the Bauhaus, which we're not going to get too into in this book, but he starts to get into color theory and line and form and all our elements and principles. This is Mr. Kandinsky. This is who is one of the members of the Bauhaus that starts to set up that organizing structure of elements and principles. Okay, that's who's responsible for it. But we don't have, what the big break here is, I mean, the color is really wonderful and interesting, and the lines, of course, and shapes, but we don't have any people in it. We don't have anything in it, right? We are looking at some early contemporary examples here, but he's breaking away from representation. So really study representationalism versus abstraction, and also realism and what's the other word I'm looking for? Naturalism, those different topics. You want to really think about when something is abstract, non-objective, or realistic, or representational. So representational, non-objective, and abstract are three major headings, and underneath that a lot of things happen. So this is abstract, but it's representational because there's people in it. There's like a trolley car here, right? And some tracks or whatever. But this is a street scene. It's representational, but it's abstract. So it's not realistic. It's not naturalistic, but it is representational. It still falls in that category. This is non-objective. We're starting to get into that. It doesn't represent anything. Non-representational. And there are differences between non-representational and non-objective. He's not a true non-objective artist, but he sort of sets the ground for it. Again, transitional person, multiple isms going on at the same time. Okay, Cubism. We're going to get into form. We were in color, now we're going into form. So this is Picasso and Braque, and also the two of these fellows, these two Spaniards that were hanging out together in France, they also developed collage. So there's a bunch of different things happening. It's not like one person does one thing and that's all they ever do. There's multiple things happening. So they are collage. They're dealing with real and not real. And they're affected. Cubism is coming out of Einstein's theories of relativity of time and space, like how multiple things are happening at once and there is no time and space, and there's all these different theories. Also, the sexual identity, Freudian a little bit here, but not so much. That gets into the surrealists. But these are prostitutes in a brothel, and we are looking at them right up front and center. And then also the influence of colonialism. These African masks are making their way back to Spain and to France, and we're looking at these interesting abstracted artworks, because African work for the most part is quite abstract, and different idealizations of the body. So Picasso's combining all these different ideas into one painting. These are 5. Originally, I think these 2 were supposed to be male. He changed them into female, and starts to show the side of the face and the front of the face at the same time, sort of with the nose going sideways. Kind of almost in a way with the Egyptian influence. He's abstracting the forms. Nothing looks really realistic at all, but we are abstract and representational in this piece. It's not non-objective because we have figures in it, but this is groundbreaking Cubism. We also see it in Guernica, which we looked at earlier. Okay, so Braque here is working with some Cubism, and it looks very much, doesn't show us, but it looks very much like our predecessor with Cezanne, heavy influence here, and a same kind of composition, right? But the things start to get much more flat planes. We see a lot more of geometric shapes. We do have some shading. We do have some brush strokes here from Braque, but he is starting to experiment with Cubism himself. and another piece from Braque, Cubism, and I believe there's a little bit of other items in here. I don't think this is our better example. This is Le Portugais, the immigrant. So we can barely make out what's happening in this piece, but this is hearkening back to the idea of Cezanne and Cubism. Well, that's where it comes from.